Hello and welcome to another episode on Chasing Hope with me, your host, Catherine Abraham. Our guest for today is a member of the Christian clergy and is one of the strongest advocates against the persecution of Christians in India. Father Cedric Prakash was named Chevalier of the Legion of Honor, one of the highest French civilian awards, acknowledging his commitment to the defense and promotion of Christian rights in India. Father Cedric was also arrested not too long ago in his pursuit of justice. Despite all the challenges, he emerges as one of the strongest voices of hope, justice, and peace for the Christian community today. Thank you so much for joining us today, Father.
Thank you, Catherine.
So, Father, my first question to you is, you've been working for human rights and you've been one of the strongest advocates abroad for the rights of Christians in India. Could you tell us what inspired you as a member of the clergy to take up activism?
Yeah, first of all, it's good to be here in your program, Chasing Hope. I feel very privileged that I can speak to your many listeners, especially the young people of India and elsewhere, on this whole idea, this whole concept of the need and importance of chasing hope. Now, coming to your question, well, I've been trying to make my voice heard, definitely in India. People in other parts of the world also hear it. But I think the roots must be seen when I was studying in Bombay, in the university, going to the slums in Dharavi, seeing the plight of the people. Then later in my college years, visiting villages where we had very poor tribals, very poor Dalits. And then I worked with All India Catholic University Federation for over a year, based in Chennai, but traveling all over the country, trying to get young people involved in what we called at that time Project Know India, KNOW, to give young people like me a chance to know and experience the country. And the plight of the people, the rural poor, the urban poor, was terrible at that time. It has in fact become much worse. Then later on, I was in Thésée in France, where, trying to get Europeans to be able to see how important it is for us to be engaged in the realities of our times. Right. This was in the 70s. And then later on, as joining the Jesuits, I've been working in the slums, I've been working in the villages, I've been working as a laborer in the Narmada Dam and digging it with ordinary families. And in that sense, over the years, my commitment to the human rights of all, very especially the poor and the marginalized, the exploited and excluded, has grown. I still have a long way to go, but just now I feel that as a Christian clergy, as a member of the Society of Jesus, my first option is option for the poor and the underprivileged of our country.
Right, that's amazing, Father. But Father, to be honest, a lot of Christians today shy away from political discussions and debates. The few who do are generally from political families. Now, how can the community be better engaged with mainstream politics?
Yeah, first of all, let us say politics is not a dirty word. It comes from people. And people have to be engaged in politics, whatever your religion, whatever your faith, whatever your ideology. Now, Pope Francis has come out on the 4th of October, the feast of St. Francis of Assisi, with a very powerful encyclical called Fratelli Tutti, which says that we are all sisters and brothers. In that, he says very clearly, for these reasons, the Church, while respecting the autonomy of political life, does not restrict her mission to the private sphere. On the contrary, she cannot and must not remain on the sidelines in the building of a better world, or fail to reawaken the spiritual energy that can contribute to the betterment of society. And then he says, see, one thing is political party politics, the other is politics. We have to be engaged in politics, taking a stand for the Constitution, taking a stand for the rights of the poor, the underprivileged of our country, the Adivasi, the Dalits, the subaltern, I think is not merely a right, but a duty of every single Christian, every single disciple of Jesus. Otherwise, we'll be failing in our witnessing value, in truly being His light in today's world. So I'm convinced that Christians must get involved in political discussions, in debates, and we cannot keep out from mainstream politics in India. One thing is getting involved in party politics. That's a different thing. But righting the wrong is an engagement. Taking a stand for the Constitution is an engagement, and that is a political engagement.
Right. And Father, your views on the interaction between the church and state. So, should the church and state be far thrown from each other, or should the church also now, especially now, make its presence felt, given the current situation across India?
Yeah, I'm very clear that there has to be a separation between the church and the state. Okay? The church has a body, and like what we're having in India. India is a secular country, yet the Ram temple takes preponderance. And this is ridiculous. The government cannot get involved in matters which have to do with organized religion. Okay? One thing is the rights of the poor. Whereas people who belong to any faith background need to get involved in what is their duty as citizens. So in that sense, Pope Francis, as I referred to just now, makes it very, very clear that every single Christian, he's talking to Catholics definitely, but he's also addressing Fratelli Tutti to all men and women of goodwill. Okay? We have to be engaged. So if I just say, we are talking about so much about environment, environment, about global warming, about climate change. Should Christians, the disciples of Jesus, should the church get involved in matters concerning the environment or not? Yes. And Pope Francis again has got a very important encyclical called Laudato Si, where he says that it's the duty of every disciple of Jesus to get involved in what is happening to our environment. So if the Western Ghats, if the Aravalli range is being destroyed by, say, those who are cutting the forests, who are taking away the precious natural resources which these areas have, the church must take a visible and vocal stand. And there are many people who have been doing it throughout the world. Whatever their faith background, they have been taking a stand for the environment, and the environmental rights of all is necessary in our world of today.
Right. And Father, to be honest, I mean, with everyone, especially people who are from different faiths, a lot of people are unaware of the persecution that Christians face in India. In fact, they even go ahead and label them as stray incidents of violence rather than addressing them in the right sense of the term as religious persecution. Now, how can we counter this?
Yeah, this is absolutely ridiculous to say that these are stray incidents, that these are aberrations. This is what we call the godified media, the lapdog media has been propagating. And many of us unthinking citizens have so on. For the last several years, Christians have been the target. We know what has happened to Graham Staines there in Orissa some years ago. We know what happened to the Christians in Kandamal in Orissa. Here in the Dangs, we had several of our churches, our Christian personnel attacked. Prime Minister Vajpayee came there to visit the Dangs, and he had tears. I was accompanying him. He had tears in his eyes. He said, this should not happen to Christians. But then he goes to the helipad and says we should have a national debate on conversion. Today, on 26th of March, 2003, on this day, two significant things happened in Gujarat. The Gujarat government unanimously passed the Gujarat Freedom of Religion Act. The opposition, the Congress and others walked out saying that it was unconstitutional. And somebody who had stood up against now the current Prime Minister of India, Harin Pandya, was killed in broad daylight on this 26th of March 2003. The law of Gujarat, which took 5 years for them to put together the rules that need to govern the implementation of the law, says that you cannot change your religion, you cannot embrace another religion if you do not first take the permission of the civil authority. I think, who's the civil authority to decide on matters of my faith. I have Article 19 and Article 25 of the Indian Constitution that gives me the right to freely preach, practice and propagate my religion, and gives me freedom of speech and expression. And here we are having, in frightening regularity, the attacks on Christians. A couple of days ago, some religious sisters were traveling from Delhi towards Orissa. In the train, they were sitting in the third AC bogie. Two sisters with their habits, Catholic sisters, and two young ladies who what we call in religious life apostolants. They were accosted by a group of ABVP and Bajrang Dal supporters. They were made to alight at the train, from the train in Jhansi. There was a whole mob that was hustling and harassing them. They were taken to the police station. The train went on towards Orissa. They had to spend their night in Jhansi. And the next day, when the police decided that they were not doing forced conversion, I'm saying, who's an ordinary citizen to decide that I am doing anything forced or not? Isn't there the law and order mechanism? What are the police doing? I'm saying this is happening with frightening regularity. The other day, a pastor in Karnataka was preaching, at a Sunday service. And suddenly a group of people come and stop his service, saying that you cannot do this. This is a hall. I'm saying I can stand on the road and preach my faith. Who says I have to preach my faith only in the church? Where is it been defined in the Constitution? Unless thinking Christians of the country realize what is happening with frightening regularity, as I said earlier, to several Christians across the board in our country, perhaps we are only going towards a downward spiral. It will become just from bad to worse.
Right. And this brings me to another incident not too long ago. In fact, you've been quite an advocate for it. Father Stan Swami, who is one of the many who are languishing in jail despite the advanced age and his health issues. Now, how can the judiciary, Father, take better cognizance of this and deliver justice in a more meaningful way?
Yes, Stan Swami, I know him from many, many years now. He is a fellow Jesuit, much senior to me. And on the 8th of October, he was arrested from his Jesuit residence in Jharkhand, brought to Bombay, produced before a special court, and incarcerated in the Taloja jail just outside Mumbai. Since then, it's nearly 6 months today. It's more than 5.5 months. And he's there. There were bail applications made, first for an interim bail on health grounds, which was rejected. And now again on the 22nd of March, just about 4 days ago, his bail application was rejected once again. Now he's 83 years old. He has been serving the Adivasis of the Jharkhand area and the other excluded members of society with a passion which makes him a true witness of the message, the mission, and the person of Jesus Christ. He's there accompanying them. He's been living a very frugal life. He's been fighting for their rights. But in doing so, he has been taking on the powerful mafia, perhaps the corporate sector, the politicians who have been exploiting the land, and they wanted him out of the way. So now in this order on the 22nd of March, which the Sessions Judge of a Special National Investigation Agency court has given, is the most ridiculous order. It's a 34-page order. We have been studying it. They say that he's a member of this band outfit. There's no proof, okay, that he's a member of any band outfit of the country. And why are you getting up now? Okay, if it's a band outfit, you should have ensured that the outfit is banned. And now outfits were, groups were under the UAPA. Now this government has made even individuals who even are in contact with any of the so-called organizations can be incarcerated. Now he's been put like 15 others under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act because of the arrested in 2018 on the 1st of January. There was this violence in Bhima Koregaon near Pune, and the people who were named were people from the Sangh Parivar. They had to be arrested, but a few days later they named other people. More than a year later, they named others, and till the 8th of October 2020, they finally arrested Father Stan Swami. He has never been to Bhima Koregaon. He never participated on the previous day in the Elgar Parishad, which is held annually and where human rights defenders from all over the country assemble for the rights of the Dalits. So the order is absolutely preposterous, is absolutely ridiculous. He suffers from Parkinson's illness. He is 83 years old,
Yes,
the
yes.
oldest person in the country to be arrested on the so-called terrorist charges. I mean, why are you afraid to release him on bail? There is a commitment given that he is not going to escape anywhere. He is there. But let him have some comfort in his old age. We have reached a level within the judicial system in several cases which is totally not merely insensitive but is inhuman, catering to the whims and fancies of a small, powerful section of our country. And we have to be aware of this and take a stand about what is happening in the country today.
Right. And Father, not too long ago also, there was the Phoenix Jairaj murder, which
Yes.
caught steam for a while. And then, of course, it died a natural death, as most of these stories do. Now, of course, the judiciary needs to step up its game. But how does the media, which is more connected with the people, do a better job? And how does it remain true to its calling when majoritarianism seems to rule the roost?
Yeah, it goes without saying that today in India we have media that has been bought up, that is corporatized, that is what we call godified, lapdog media. They toe the line that they're expected to toe. Otherwise, they don't get revenues. They don't get government patronage. We have very, very little independent media, either in the electronic section or in the print section. It's much less. So, thankfully, we still have social media, but social media, you can have a lot of fake news also going about. And unless we have good people in the media, unless we have committed media who cannot be bought up, who cannot be corrupted, cannot be communalized, we have lost, a lot of democracy in India. We know that media is the fourth pillar of democracy. Look at the op-eds that are coming out. Look at the news that is being literally bandied on the front pages. Does it help the average citizen, to discern, to think for herself or himself? Does it help in educating people? Or is it just full of buy one, get one free kind of advertisements? It's all kinds of gimmicks, all kinds of fake news, all
Right.
kinds of sensational news. I think we have a long way to go in getting back media to their primary role, to be free, to be fearless, and to take a stand for what is right where the Constitution of India is concerned.
Right. And this brings me to a very personal question, Father. Of course, you have faced the media, you faced the judiciary, you have faced the cops also. So, have you, in the course of your time as an activist, ever felt threatened enough to discontinue your work at any point?
See, I really believe in Jesus, and I believe that unless I have that deep faith in Jesus, who is protecting me, guiding me, helping me maybe to grow, to become a better person, I will not be able to do the work that I'm trying to. See, being threatened, there have been death threats. I've had police protecting me at one stage with orders from the Supreme Court and all kinds of things. But I believe it's part of an occupational hazard. Once I give in to fear, I give a strong message that I no longer believe in Jesus.
Right.
Jesus tells us, fear no one except those who can harm your soul. What am I afraid of? So what are we Christians afraid of? And there in the desert, just before his public ministry, for 40 days, Jesus is there, tempted in the desert. The devil promises him, power, prestige, possession, gives him pride, anything possible. Jesus says, get away from me, Satan. That is not my mission in the world. So what are we protecting? Are we protecting our properties? As Christians, are we protecting our structural churches made of limestone and mortar and brick and iron and steel and whatever? Are we protecting our church compounds and our convent compounds? Or are we talking about discipleship of Jesus, which is in mission, which is in the midst of the people, which takes a stand for the poor and the marginalized? Maybe that woman caught in adultery who tells the scribes and Pharisees, the Sadducees, the power brokers of his time, stop it. I have come, not to subscribe to your views, but I've come to give the world a new commandment. Love one another. And that is what we should be following. But I cannot love one another, as once again I go back to Pope Francis's Fratelli Tutti, if I do not reach out to that man there on the streets who has been brutalized, who has been massacred, who has been denied his rights, and literally lift him up and take a stand for him, just as Jesus would have done today.
Right. And is there any incident or experience, Father, on the persecution of Christians that you believe has been conveniently brushed under the carpet in perhaps a recent past?
There are plenty. Look at what happened in the Dangs here. In Kandhamal, there have been some who have been convicted, but the main people, get away with murder. In so many cases where the powerful have been involved in the bashing up of the churches and the desecration of churches, the beating up of Christian personnel. We have had Christians all across India even being killed. Okay? The ones who have been responsible, the main perpetrators, as you'd call them, the big fish, get away with impunity, and then they cover themselves with some kind of immunity, as we see what is happening in India today. There are several. There's not just one incident to narrate, but several.
Right. And Father, since we're at it, can you tell us what is your understanding of the principle of secularism and how it has lost its essence over the past few years?
Yeah, the point is the word secular in a Western context and Western jargon definition says it has nothing to do with religion. Okay? Right. It is in fact anti-religion. But when the fathers and we have had several Christians in the Constituent Assembly, including a Jesuit, Jerome D'Souza, when Dr. Ambedkar, whose birth anniversary we'll observe on the 14th of April, gave us the great Constitution. They definitely spoke about justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. And they spoke about certain dimensions, and which involved respect for every single religion and the freedom to practice, to preach, and propagate my religion. Secularism is about India's diversity. That's about our wealth. The ability for us to live together, maybe in the same housing society, in the same village, where somebody is crying out, the time of prayers from the mosque, when somebody is ringing the bell at puja, or perhaps somebody is celebrating a worship in the church. Okay? It's not merely about coexistence. It's not merely about tolerance. It's about complementing one another. I've been born and brought up in Baikla in Bombay, where the school I went to, we had boys from every single faith. We had Parsis. We have between two Parsi Bags, Jarbag and Rustam Bag. We had Hindus. We had several Muslims, we had Jains, we had Sikhs, we had Jews, we had Christians of every single denomination in our school. As boys, we played together. We didn't see the color of our skin or the label of religion up our sleeve. When we fought one group of boys with another group of boys. Okay, when we played games, we played one group of boys and so on. It was not just before the exams. We had this big Gloria church there. All my companions, Hindu, Muslim, Jain, Parsi, Sikh, Jew, used to come and pray to Saint Anthony. Okay? But the joke is you don't study all the time, and everyone feels that Saint Anthony will do the trick and help you pass. See, but for us, it didn't matter whom you prayed to. Okay? Right. Now, suddenly, we are made to see we are destroying this very fabric of secularism, which has meant propagating the diversity of our country. And that, I think, is a sad commentary on the reality of our country today.
Right. And Father, since this podcast is traditionally all about chasing hope, I'd like to know your final thought to our young listeners, especially those who feel that, activism is not for them right now. It's better to be safe than risk it all for the right. A small word of hope and encouragement for them, and of course to even inspire them to now take the call and not just pass on the baton but actually hold on to the baton and take it forward.
Yeah. So for me, hope is a four-letter word, which
Yes.
means many things.
Right.
First of all, the H in hope means happiness. It means gladness. It means joy. Not that material happiness that one might find in a bar or discotheque or just in the material celebration. It has to be this internal happiness, which only Jesus can give us and bring to us. The happiness which we can radiate in our demeanor, in our lifestyle, in our attitudes towards others. And that is important. The second word in hope alphabet is O. It is about openness. How open am I to the signs of the times, to another, to someone who is not of my denomination, not of my caste, not
Right.
of my background? How many Hindu and Muslim friends do I have? Okay. How open am I to the changing times? How open am I to be visible and vocal, to take a stand for what is right? I can be open, but if I don't participate in what is happening in the realities of our time, I cannot have hope. I need to participate in the lives of others. And that is very, very, very important. Participation is accompaniment. Participating is that I am not a bystander. I am not a silent spectator. I am here in a meaningful way, trying to participate in the realities of what is happening today. And E is encounter. That encounter that Moses has in the burning bush with Yahweh God.
Right.
That encounter with God, our Creator. It means prayer. Yesterday, we also celebrated the Feast of the Annunciation. The encounter that first Mary has with the angel who comes on behalf of God, and then the encounter of Mary with the kinswoman Elizabeth, okay, where she sings the Magnificat. So, only when you encounter God in the silence of your heart, of your soul, only when you encounter God in the stillness of creation, in the chirping of the bird, and perhaps in the gentle rustle of the leaves, only then you can truly say that there is hope. We need happiness, we need openness, we need participation, and we need encounter to be women and men of hope in our world of today.
Thank you so much, Father. That is so inspiring. Thank you for taking out time. Thank you for your
you.
activism and your efforts in making India a more secular country in the truest sense of the term. And thank you for taking the time off for Chasing Hope and its listeners, who I'm sure have been educated on that side of India that has been very carefully hidden over the past couple of years. So I hope you all have enjoyed this conversation, and I do wish to see all of you in our next episode on Chasing Hope. Until then, stay safe, stay home, and of course, be cautious.